So cool. I think we'll try to finish off lecture 9 today. So lecture 9 is basically the Bayesian methods, right? And basically lecture 9 will give us a good understanding to really get into both naive Bayes and logistic regression. So hopefully we will finish lecture 9 today. Then next class we will do naive Bayes and after that logistic regression, right? So by the end of next week we will be finished logistic regression. And then I think the homework that I will have, this particular homework, homework 2, will be till like basically Bayesian methods, right? So there will be probably one question I will ask on like maximum likelihood and maximum a posteriori. And the midterm exam will be till logistic regression. So just want to basically put this assignment. I'll also send an email on this a little bit later. Okay, so coming back to Bayesian learning, right? So what we looked at last time is we looked at essentially, maybe this might be a good place to start. So we looked at maximum likelihood estimation, right? And we looked at the coin flip problem over here. And we saw that the theta hat MLE is essentially the number of heads that you get, right, divided by the total number of coin flips, right, which is alpha h plus alpha t. So we saw that one issue with this is that if you have very less amount of data, then you could easily come up with a conclusion that if I just have five coin flips, right, then the theta MLE would be 1, right? And of course, this is very unlikely if you have a fair coin, right? So the question is that can we really commit to such a strong conclusion with little evidence, right? So that's where priors come in. So basically with a prior, what we are saying is that, okay, there is a certain prior probability of just theta, right? And this is irrespective of any data I have seen. I just assume that my PDFs follows a certain trend, okay? So this is, for example, beta 2. So like one common prior that is used is the beta prior, right? So the beta distribution, this is like a beta PDF. And this is with different values of beta, right? So this is beta 2 comma 2. What basically beta 2 comma 2 is that it will basically be the highest beta PDF will be at around 0.5, right? When theta is equal to 0.5, basically. So typically, I mean, you would use like a beta prior, which is something like this, like beta 2 comma 2, right? The other thing with 2 comma 2 is that so actually, okay, so the beta distribution, right? So the beta distribution has two parameters, which is alpha comma beta, right? And these two parameters determine basically what the shift of the beta distribution is. So for example, if you have a beta of 3 comma 2, right, what you are saying is that you are actually making it more likely for there to be a peak at, you know, a slightly lower probability, a slightly lower value of theta, essentially, right? So 3 comma 2 essentially means that the entire curve is shifted more towards the left. So essentially, if you see, for example, the peak probability of the beta distribution, I believe this number is around 0.4, right? So reason why it is 0.4 is because this is 2 over 5 for the beta. Okay, so you can similarly, so basically based on this beta prior, you can you can tweak this based on how much you assume that your coin is biased, right? But I think the simplest way is to just assume that your coin is unbiased and just use a prior as beta or 2 comma 2, right? So now the question is that if you have your beta distribution, then how can you use your prior information to change the learning? Okay, so this is where Bayesian learning comes into play. So in the maximum likelihood estimation, right, in MLE, what we basically did is that we were maximizing theta. So theta is the parameter which we are trying to learn, right? So we were maximizing theta where we maximize theta given the data distribution D, right? So this is maximum likelihood. In Bayesian learning, right, we are wanting to take the prior into account. So you can define the posterior probability, which is P of theta given the data. Okay, and the probability of theta given the data using the Bayes rule. So this is basically nothing but the Bayes rule. Right? So using the Bayes rule, this is nothing but probability of d given theta multiplied by p of theta divided by p of d. Right? This is the normalization. Equivalently, another way to say it is p of d is independent of theta, right? It doesn't depend on what the value of theta is. So when you're just looking at optimization, you just care about this term. Equivalently, what it means is that p of theta given d is proportional to p of d given theta multiplied by p of theta, right? Because this normalization constant is independent of theta. Okay, so in the case of uniform priors, if p of theta is equal to 1, is proportional to 1. Sorry, I didn't mean to do this, but yeah. So if p of theta is proportional to 1, right, then p of theta given d is proportional to p of d given theta, right? So there is no theta, so p of theta is not a function of theta as such. Okay, so uniform priors Bayesian learning just gets back to the maximum likelihood estimation. Okay, so what are good prior distributions? Okay, so typically priors is something that you would represent expert domain knowledge, right? So essentially, okay, so the other thing is statisticians typically choose them to make the posterior distribution nice. So this notion is called conjugate priors. That's why when you have this, basically these kind of Bernoulli distributions, right? We often use the beta distribution as the prior. And the main reason to use the beta distribution is because the posterior becomes a nice form, right? So the posterior distribution, we want it to be a nice form. That's why you use conjugate priors. So you essentially choose a prior which first of all makes sense, right? So this is makes sense and then looks nice or becomes nice. The form becomes nice, right? Because we don't want to optimize a very crazy optimization problem in the end. So what is a good prior for the bias in a coin flipping problem, right? So there could be two options. One is to use a truncated Gaussian, but again, as I said, it becomes harder to get the optimization to work with. So the common choice is the beta distribution, right? And the beta distribution essentially uh, kind of models what we want, right? So yeah, so there are two factors. I think we spoke about this briefly, right? So there are basically beta of alpha comma beta, right? And there are two terms over here. If so, beta 1 comma 1 is basically a uniform distribution. This is essentially uniform, right? It's assigning a weight of 1 everywhere. Beta 2 comma 2 becomes slightly more interesting, right? And basically, as you make alpha and beta slightly different, then you start getting all of these kind of curves, right? Now, beta 30 comma 20 is going to have the same peak at 0.4, right? Just that the distribution becomes much more peaked compared to beta 3 comma 2, right? So larger the values of beta, essentially what we are saying is that I'm really increasing the probability of how much I'm sure about the mean point. Okay, so maybe I'll just add a quick slide over here, right? So again, this is like kind of prior knowledge, right? So this is prior knowledge. So in any prior curve, okay, which looks like this, okay, I have a peak over here, which is my theta hat prior. This I believe is what is my prior belief. Okay, so example, if it's a fair coin, right? I assume that my theta hat prior should be approximately equal to 0.5, right? So 0.5 should be the probability that I get a heads or a tails. Okay, and this distance depends on how confident I am of my prior, right? So this is confidence of my prior. So if the more flat this is, right, the lower value of alpha and beta. So lower value of alpha comma beta will imply flat or less peaked. So if I have a higher value of alpha beta, right, then I'll get this to be more and more peak. So for example, if this is like alpha, if this is like beta of something like say 100 comma 100, right, this will probably look like this. So I'm very certain that it should be the prior. So I'm really kind of changing my posterior more and more towards the prior. Is this clear, everyone? Any questions with this? So essentially these are the two main parameters of the beta distribution. Right? That's why we see beta 30,20 is much more peaked, or much more basically the width of this is much lesser compared to this. Any questions on this so far? Okay. So the distribution of the beta distribution, which is beta h comma beta t. Okay, so this is also so we used alpha h and alpha t as the main likelihood function distribution, right? Alpha h, if you recall, alpha h was our number of heads that we see in the data, and this is number of tails, right? The beta distribution essentially has theta raised to beta h minus 1 multiplied by 1 minus theta raised to beta t minus 1. Okay, so this is beta of beta h comma beta t. Okay, and there is this normalization factor which we can ignore for now. Okay, so what this means is that the posterior distribution is p of theta given d is actually proportional to theta raised to alpha h multiplied by 1 minus theta raised to alpha t multiplied by theta raised to beta h minus 1, right, multiplied by 1 minus theta raised to beta t minus 1. So if you do the math, what we see is that we get exactly the posterior distribution to be beta of alpha h plus beta h comma alpha t plus beta t. Okay. So now, okay, so now we saw MLE, right, maximum likelihood estimation. So the second kind of estimation which maximizes the posterior distribution is called the maximum a posteriori distribution, okay, or maximum a posteriori estimation, or MAP estimation. Okay, so the MAP estimation, essentially what it does is that it tries to find theta MAP as argmax of theta of P of theta given D. Okay, so the main difference between theta MLE and theta MLE and theta MEP is that the theta MLE has a uniform prior, whereas the theta MEP allows for arbitrary priors. Okay, so coming back to the to the coin flip case, right? In the case of coin flip, when we have 5 coin flips, the MLE would give theta MLE to be 1, right? But if you do a beta 2 comma 2, right, and you compute the theta MAP, what we will see is that the MAP is actually 6 over 7. Now the reason why it is 6 over 7 is because it turns out, as we saw over here, right, this is beta of alpha h plus beta h comma alpha t plus beta t, right? So the maximum of the beta distribution is nothing but this quantity, okay, which is alpha h plus beta h minus 1 divided by alpha h plus beta h plus alpha t plus beta t minus 1, right? So if I have a large number of observations and my beta h and my beta t are small, this will approximately be equal to alpha h over alpha h plus t, which is what we want, right? If I have a lot of data, I don't want my prior to really tell me a lot, right? But if I have very less amount of data, then I want to use my prior knowledge, and I don't want to be too committal about saying that, I get a theta MLE of 1, but rather I want to say that, okay, maybe, I mean, I use a prior of beta 2 comma 2, right? So I'm not terribly certain, but I have, maybe, it should be around, it should be around it should be around 0.5, right? But I'm not very confident that it's 0.5. That's what my prior is saying, right? That's the reason why, I basically get this term to be basically 6/7, right? Okay. All right. So we have 5 minutes left. I'll just quickly cover this topic very briefly. It's a little bit advanced, but I'll just give the high level intuition actually. Or maybe I'll just see to stop and see if there are any questions. Are there any questions? Any questions until now? Okay. Yeah, so unfortunately, because I felt sick, I've fallen a little behind on the recordings, but I will be putting up some videos of this the last couple of lectures actually. I think the last two lectures the videos need to be put up, so I will be putting this up. I'll be putting this up before next week, hopefully. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so the sample complexity, right? So the sample complexity, this is slightly more advanced topic, so I'll just go over it in a little bit, kind of a high level. The question is, how many coin flips do we need in order to guarantee that our learned parameter does not differ too much from the true parameter, right? So essentially, this is kind of a high probability bound. So there is this notion called Chernoff bound, right? And the Chernoff bound essentially says the following. So this is the main bound from Chernoff. It says that suppose y1 to yn are IID. So IID, if you recall, basically is independent and identically distributed, right? So if I have independent and identically distributed random variables, taking values in either 0 or 1, right? Such that the expected value of yi is equal to y. Okay, so that's like the mean essentially. Then for any epsilon greater than 0, the probability that y minus 1 over n, so basically this is the mean, right? So sorry. So the probability that the difference between y minus the empirical mean, which is 1 over n sum over I yi, is greater than or equal to epsilon, right, goes down as we have more and more data. So this is very intuitive, right? Essentially what the Chernoff bound is saying is that the more data we have, the closer will be my estimate of the mean of of my y-axis, right? The more data I get. So we can use this very simple. We can use this very simple kind of Chernoff bound over here. And essentially, the way we can apply Chernoff bound is that we have x1 to xn as IID coin flips, right? And each xi has a probability, basically, has a parameter theta, and theta true is the true parameter, right? So after I have n coin flips, I see my coin flips. I see the number of heads and number of tails, right? The theta MLE that we saw was exactly this thing, right? It was exactly the mean, because the mean is nothing but, so if you define xi to be 1 if it is a heads, or to be 0 if it is a tails, right? Then 1 over n, the sum over I xi, capital Xi, is nothing but the theta hat MLE, right? So using a Chernoff bound, what we know is that the probability of theta true minus 1 over n minus theta hat MLE, this being greater than or equal to epsilon, is basically goes down as e raised to minus 2n epsilon square. Okay, so if my n is very large, then this quantity is very small, right? So exactly, this is what I was saying, right? So this quantity, which is 1 over n, the sum over I xi, is nothing but theta MLE, right? So theta true minus theta MLE, this probability being greater than epsilon goes down very quickly with n. Okay, so essentially what this means is you can do some math around, right? And you can see that to get to essentially make the probability less than delta, we require n, the number of samples, to be 1 over epsilon square log of 2 over delta. Okay, so what you can do is you can fill in some numbers over here afterwards, right? For example, you can take epsilon to be, say, maybe 1e minus 2, suppose, right? You take epsilon to be 1e minus 2, and you take delta, which is the probability of this happening, to be also 1e minus 2, suppose, right? Then you have essentially over here, you have in the denominator 1 over 2 epsilon square, right? So this, if epsilon is 1e minus 2, then this number becomes 10 raised to 4. And there is this log term, which roughly is like a constant, right? This will be like, say, log of 10 raised to 2, which is like 2 or 3 or something, right? So roughly you need something to the order of 10 raised to 4 examples for this to be true. So the main bound, this depends on epsilon. How small you want epsilon to be, that many number of samples you will require to actually get an accurate estimate. So in practice, it turns out that the Chernoff bound is actually quite pessimistic, right? And in fact, we'll be looking at Chernoff bounds a lot more when we look at some machine learning, so some kind of learning theory. So it's called computational learning theory, right? Or machine learning theory. So when we look at machine learning theory, we'll be looking at some of these bounds a little bit more carefully, because we can actually look at a lot of generalization results with the power of these bounds. It turns out, unfortunately, that these bounds are somewhat pessimistic, right? So they are somewhat worst case bounds. So in practice, you will actually require much less amount of data to get, a reasonable estimate on epsilon, right? But this is still a worst case bound, right? So this is a theoretical bound, which is true. That means that you will definitely be able to satisfy this with these many samples. Okay, so this ends lecture 9. So we will actually start the naive Bayes next time. Any questions? How do you determine the value of epsilon? Yeah, so this is something that you can determine, right? I mean, depends on your application. So you have your theta MLE, you have your estimation. Now you know that your theta MLE is, say, 0.5, suppose you get, right? Or maybe your theta MLE is 0.7. And now you want the absolute difference to be less than, say, 10 raised to minus 2. This is a reasonable error, right? That within an error of 10 raised to minus 2, this is the epsilon. So the epsilon is something that you set as a user. Maybe you want an epsilon, maybe you are fine for your application to just have 10 raised to minus 1, right? 10 raised to minus 1 though is like 0.1. So 0.1 might be too large of an error because your theta is like 0.7, right? So if theta is 0.7, 0.1 might be too large of an error. So typically you might choose 0.01 as an error. That means that you are somewhere, your theta true is somewhere between 0.69 to 0.71. You can make it even lesser, you can make it 0.01, right? The only trade-off there is that from your theoretical bound, you require 1 over epsilon square, right? So with 0.01, you will require 10 raised to 4 number of examples, but with 0.001, right, you will require 10 raised to 6 number of examples. So your examples basically grow quadratically with epsilon. So that's the only drawback. Yeah. Okay.